The air was thick. It tasted of coming rain and fear. Ash, a lean tomcat with fur the color of twilight, crouched low. His belly pressed against the cold, damp alley floor. He watched from the deep shadows of a rusted metal bin. Terrible sounds clawed at the night, growls deep and rumbling like angry thunder, snarls sharp and furious like tearing claws. Dogs and cats, again. Their bitter war painted the darkness with violence. He shivered, not just from the night chill. It was a familiar icy dread that seeped into his bones, a cold grip around his heart. He saw them then, silhouettes moving fast, too fast, a flash of ginger fur, a blur of black. Teeth glinted under the sickly yellow glow of a distant street lamp. A yelp, a scream, the sounds were ugly. They spoke of pain. They spoke of hatred. Ash pressed himself flatter, wishing the shadows would swallow him whole. He was a street cat, used to hardship, used to fending for himself. But this raw, unthinking fury always shook him. It was a storm he could not escape, a fire that threatened to consume everything, everyone. He closed his eyes tight, but the sounds only grew louder in his mind. The fight raged on. It felt like seasons passing, not just moments. The scent of blood, coppery and sharp, drifted on the breeze. It mixed with the smell of fierce sweat and wet fur. Ash's own heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He recognized some of the shapes. Old Grumbles, the scarred tabby who ruled the bins by the fish market. Fang, the wiry terrier with a bark louder than his bite. They were usually enemies, yes, but this was different. This was a frenzy, a madness. He wondered if they even remembered why they fought, or if they just fought because they always had. Slowly, the terrible chorus began to fade. Exhausted whimpers replaced the angry barks. Weak hisses replaced the confident snarls. Figures limped away, disappearing into the deeper blackness between buildings. The alley grew quiet again, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was a heavy, wounded silence. Ash remained hidden, every muscle tensed. He waited, he listened. The fight was over for now, but the hatred he knew still lingered in the air like a poison. It would return, it always did, and that thought was the most terrifying of all. He felt a deep ache, a weariness that went beyond his tired limbs. The next morning the sun rose on a changed world. Changed for Ash, at least. He'd crept back to his small, sheltered den beneath a tangle of overgrown ivy. It wasn't much, just a hollow in the earth, lined with scavenged scraps of cloth. But it had been home. It had been safe. He had shared it with Flicker, a young she-cat with fur like autumn leaves. She was quick and clever, her purr a soft rumble of contentment. She had been his everything, his small patch of warmth in a cold, harsh world. He had warned her about the night fights. He had begged her to stay hidden, but Flicker was brave. Too brave, or perhaps too curious. He found her near the edge of the alley. She was still. Her vibrant fur was dull, stained with something dark. The light in her bright green eyes was gone. There were no marks on her, no signs of a struggle. Just the stillness, the terrible, unyielding stillness. Ash nuzzled her, a desperate, choked sound caught in his throat. He licked her cold cheek. "Flicker?" he whispered. His voice was a raw, broken thing. The silence that answered him was a crushing weight. He knew with a certainty that shattered his heart that the chaos, the blind hatred of the night before had stolen her from him. He stayed with her for a long time. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that did nothing to warm him. The sounds of the city rose around him. The rumble of two-leg monsters on the thunder path, the distant shouts, the chirping of sparrows. But all Ash heard was the echo of Flicker's purr, a sound he would never hear again. He felt hollow, empty, like a scooped-out gourd. Everything he had cared for, everything that had given his difficult life meaning, was gone, snatched away by a senseless, brutal conflict that had nothing to do with her, nothing to do with him, yet had cost them everything. Grief was a cold, sharp stone in his chest. What was the point of anything now? He had always focused on survival, finding the next meal, finding shelter from the rain, avoiding the dangers. But survival felt empty without Flicker. The world seemed gray, leached of all its color. The fights between the cats and dogs had always been a backdrop to his life, a dangerous noise he tried to ignore. Now that noise had become a personal tragedy. It had reached into his small, hidden life and ripped it apart. He had nothing left to lose, and in that terrible emptiness, something new, something hard and determined began to stir. Days turned into a blur of aching emptiness. Ash wandered the alleys. He saw the usual tensions, dogs growling at cats from across the street, cats hissing from rooftops at passing canines. The fear was a constant hum beneath the city's noise. Each snarl, each bark was a fresh stab of pain, a reminder of Flicker. He saw the fear in the eyes of the younger cats. He saw the weary anger in the older dogs. They were all trapped in a cycle of violence that benefited no one. It was a mouse-brained way to live, a fox-hearted existence. He thought of Flicker's gentle nature, her playful spirit. She would have hated this. One evening, as a blood-red sun bled across the sky, Ash sat on a crumbling wall. He looked out over the territory, his territory, their territory, cats and dogs, sharing the same scraps, the same dangers, the same city. Yet they acted like prey and predator, driven by an ancient, unseen enemy, their own fear. It was foolish. It was wasteful. He had lost everything to this foolishness. What if it didn't have to be this way? The thought was small at first, a tiny spark in the vast darkness of his grief. He was just one cat, a lone, grieving Tom. What could he possibly do? The spark flickered, then grew stronger. He had nothing left, no one to protect but the memory of Flicker, no den to call his own anymore, not really. This gave him a strange kind of freedom, a dangerous kind of courage. If he failed, what more could he lose? His life? It felt worthless without her, but if he did nothing, the violence would continue. More Flickers would be lost, more hearts would be broken. He clenched his claws, digging them into the rough stone of the wall. A vow formed in his heart, silent but unshakable. He would try. He had to try. He didn't know how. He had no grand plan. He was not a leader. He was not a fighter. Not in that way. He was just Ash. But he had seen the cost of hatred. He had felt its sharpest sting. He would speak. He would try to make them listen. Cats first, perhaps. Then, the impossible. The dogs. His heart pounded at the thought. It was a terrifying prospect. Many would call him mouse-brain. Many would threaten him. But the image of Flicker's still form, the memory of her lost purr, burned brighter than any fear. He would walk into the heart of the conflict. He would carry his grief as a shield and his hope as a fragile banner. His first attempts were met with suspicion. He approached a group of younger cats huddled near a warm steam vent. "The fighting," he began, his voice raspy from disuse. "It has to stop." They looked at him, eyes wide and wary. A ginger queen, her ribs showing, hissed, "Easy for you to say, Loner. The dogs won't stop." Ash understood their fear. He had lived it. "But what if we tried to talk?" he pressed gently. "What if they are as tired of this as we are?" He spoke of Flicker, his voice soft with pain. He spoke of the endless cycle. Some listened, others scoffed and turned away. But a few looked thoughtful. A tiny seed of doubt had been planted. Next, he sought out old Grumbles. The scarred tabby was a respected, if feared figure. Finding him alone was difficult. Ash approached cautiously, keeping his body low, his tail still. "Grumbles," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his paws. "We need to end this war." Grumbles fixed him with a hard, yellow stare. "Are you soft in the head, Loner? They are dogs. They understand only teeth and claws." Ash held his gaze. "And what has that brought us? More loss? More fear? Flicker is gone because of it." He saw a flicker of something in Grumble's eyes. Pain, memory. The old Tom was silent for a long moment, then he grunted, "Words are wind." But he didn't chase Ash away. The hardest part was yet to come, the dogs. He found a relatively neutral space, a patch of scruffy parkland where the scents of both groups mingled, but rarely clashed violently. He waited. Eventually a young hound, one he'd seen from afar, approached the edge of the park. Ash took a deep breath. He stepped out into the open. The hound froze, a low growl rumbling in its chest. Ash sat. He made himself small. "I don't want to fight," he called out, his voice carrying on the still air. "I want to talk." The hound tilted its head, confused. This was not how cats behaved. Other dogs, drawn by the stillness, began to appear. Other cats, drawn by Ash's courage, watched from the shadows. It was a start, a terrifying, fragile start. There were no grand speeches, no sudden unity, just one cat driven by loss, stepping across an invisible line. He spoke of his grief. He spoke of the endless, pointless battles. He saw suspicion in their eyes. He heard the mistrust in their low growls and hesitant hisses. But he also saw a weariness that mirrored his own, a flicker of curiosity. It would be a long journey, a path filled with danger and doubt. But as Ash looked at the wary faces, both canine and feline, a sliver of hope pierced through his sorrow. Perhaps, just perhaps, a silent paw could lead the way to peace. Flicker would have wanted him to try.